You don't scare me, sir!
You should be very afraid.
Rules are rules, Karen Bellamy said, blocking the blue paint with her heel. Move her chair or I'll tow you. My daughter whimpered as the board chair lifted her phone, already filming, already smiling. I told the tyrant in heels something she didn't expect. I said the camera caught everything, including the grab, including the moment she yanked hair to make a point. I said witnesses were closer than she thought. The clipboard queen laughed, confident, untouchable. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. My name is Daniel Cross. I'd spent years learning how to keep calm when chaos tried to bait me. The enforcer in crimson didn't know that, didn't see the discipline under my stillness, or the way restraint can be sharper than rage. She saw a quiet father and mistook quiet for weak. The handicap space beside the clubhouse wasn't just paint and signs to us. It was survival. It was the shortest path from car to door on days when my daughter's legs shook and her breath ran thin. It was the place where dignity lived when the world tried to rush her. Karen Bellamy treated it like a stage. She stepped closer, phone angled down, voice raised for her audience. HOA policy doesn't care about excuses, the board chair said. Compliance or consequences. When my daughter tried to pull away, the tyrant in heels reached, fingers tangling hair, a sharp tug meant to assert control without witnesses daring to interfere. I moved then, not fast, not loud. I placed myself between them and felt the heat rise behind my ribs. I told her to stop. The clipboard queen smirked and tightened her grip just enough to hurt, not enough to look bad on video. That's when the air changed. Cars idled. Doors paused mid-slam. Neighbors stared. Somewhere behind us, a man coughed and looked away. The enforcer in crimson thrived on that silence. Karen Bellamy loved rules because rules let her pretend cruelty was procedure. I asked you a question then, though you couldn't hear it yet. Where are you watching from? A kitchen table? A hospital room? A quiet apartment after everyone's asleep? Wherever you are, you know the feeling. When authority overreaches and calls it order. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't touch her. I told her the filming needed to stop. I told her the space was legally marked, medically necessary, and protected. I told her the grab crossed a line no policy could erase. The board chair leaned in and whispered that she ran this place. My daughter cried out. The sound cut through me. The tyrant in heels finally released, shoving the chair aside to make her point. Phones came up then, neighbors braver when cruelty was obvious. Karen Bellamy straightened her jacket and announced a violation notice, as if paper could cover what hands had done. Sirens wailed somewhere far off, not for us, not yet. The clipboard queen turned back to her car, satisfied, already planning the next squeeze. I knelt beside my daughter, checking her, breathing with her, promising she was safe. I looked up and memorized faces. This wasn't over. The space, the video, the witnesses, everything had weight now. Karen Bellamy had made it public. And once injustice steps into the light, it doesn't get to choose how the story ends. The lot emptied slowly after Karen Bellamy drove off, tires crunching gravel like punctuation. I stayed kneeling until my daughter's breathing steadied, until the shock drained from her hands. Phones lowered, doors closed, silence returned, thick and accusing. By morning, the clipboard queen had turned silence into paperwork. A notice slid under my door, stamped urgent, citing obstruction, disorderly conduct, and misuse of designated parking. The board chair signed it with a flourish that tried to look official. I read it twice, then a third time, feeling the familiar pressure behind my eyes. The tyrant in heels didn't stop there. She emailed neighbors, copied the HOA list, and framed the scene as enforcement. Words like compliance and community safety did heavy lifting, while truth was buried under policy numbers. The enforcer in crimson knew how to dress a lie until it passed inspection. At the cafe down the street, I caught the whispers. A woman paused mid-sip and looked away. A man shook his head like this was inevitable. Karen Bellamy's pattern revealed itself in fragments. Fines for chalk, warnings for wind chimes, threats over hedges. It wasn't one incident. It was a system tuned to punish anyone who made her feel small. At my workplace, a converted warehouse with glass walls, the day blurred. I replayed the tug, the smirk, the camera angled just right. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from the board chair, clipped and cheerful, reminding me of deadlines. The clipboard queen loved deadlines because they shortened mercy. That afternoon, the tyrant in heels showed up at our door with a courier, another notice. This one warned of towing privileges revoked and access restrictions to common areas. Karen Bellamy stood back, arms crossed, watching me read. She asked if I'd learned my lesson. I said nothing. Silence unsettled her more than shouting. Across the street, a neighbor lingered behind her blinds. When our eyes met, they flinched. Fear lives like that, half seen, practiced. The enforcer in crimson thrived on it, cultivating obedience one warning at a time. I spent the evening calling numbers listed at the bottom of the notices, voicemail, automated menus. The system was designed to exhaust. The board chair knew persistence looked like defiance on paper. I took notes, logged times, saved copies, not because I trusted the process, but because records remember when people pretend not to. Karen Bellamy escalated again the next day. A post appeared on the community portal, comments locked, announcing stricter enforcement of parking and accessibility to protect values. The clipboard queen framed herself as guardian. The tyrant in heels hid harm behind stewardship. A small crowd gathered near the clubhouse that evening, curious, cautious. I heard my name spoken softly, then corrected. Labels travel faster than facts. The enforcer in crimson walked the perimeter, satisfied, phone in hand, filming compliance like trophies. I watched faces change as they recognized the pattern they'd excused. Mothers tightened grips. Retirees exchanged looks. Someone muttered that it could have been any child. The air shifted, subtle but real, like weather turning. Power senses that moment and panics. I held my daughter's hand and felt resolve settle. This wasn't about a space anymore. It was about who gets to define rules and who pays when power goes unchecked. Karen Bellamy had turned a neighborhood into a courtroom without judges. She'd underestimated something else, too. The way patterns crack when light keeps pressing. Night fell, screens glowed, messages pinged in quiet apartments. Curtains twitched. A few neighbors typed, deleted, and typed again, wrestling with fear and truth. Somewhere, a video waited. Somewhere, a witness weighed conscience against comfort. And somewhere inside me, a plan began to form. Not loud, not rushed, but patient enough to let the tyrant in heels finish overplaying her hand. I exhaled, steady, knowing momentum had shifted and that tomorrow would test every lie she'd stacked so neatly against us. The community pool sat quiet at dawn, steam lifting off blue tiles while the gates creaked open. I went there because Karen Bellamy hated witnesses, and water reflected everything. The enforcer in crimson arrived late, heels clicking, clipboard tucked like armor, scanning the deck as if ownership followed her shadow. She posted another notice near the rules board, smoothing the paper twice, satisfied. I watched from a bench, heart steady, eyes open. That's when I saw Lydia Perez. She hovered by the lifeguard stand, keys twisting, shoulders tight, weight shifting from heel to toe. Lydia was the assistant property manager, mid-40s, precise, and tired in a way sleep never fixed. She'd emailed me once with a typo apology and never met my eyes since. The board chair waved her over, voice low, finger-tapping policy. Lydia nodded too fast. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. The clipboard queen spoke, smiling, and Lydia flinched at the smile. I felt the moment stretch, the way truth does before it breaks. Karen Bellamy turned, caught me watching, and lifted her phone. "We're documenting compliance," the tyrant in heels said sweetly. Lydia's hands shook. She tucked them behind her back. Her eyes flicked to the water, then to me, then away. I nodded once, slow, giving her space to breathe. The enforcer in crimson stepped closer, invading it. Lydia swallowed hard. She murmured something about procedure, voice thin. Karen Bellamy interrupted, sharper now, eyes cold. "Stick to the script," the board chair said. The words landed heavy, like a hand on Lydia's shoulder. I saw it then, the conflict written in posture and pause. She straightened, then sagged, a decision wobbling. The clipboard queen turned back to the notice, triumphant, already counting obedience. I stood and walked closer, not touching, not speaking, Lydia's gaze locked on my daughter's bracelet peeking from my pocket. Her breath hitched. The tyrant in heels noticed, frowned, then blocked the view with a practiced step. "This area's restricted," Karen Bellamy said, louder. Lydia flinched again, a reflex born of long days and longer meetings. I stepped back, letting the moment sit with her. When the board chair finally left, heels retreating like applause, Lydia stayed. She stared at the water until the steam thinned. Her shoulders dropped a fraction, relief mixed with dread. She didn't speak, but her hands stopped shaking. The silence felt earned. I sat again, pretending to scroll, listening to the hum of pumps and distant traffic. Lydia paced once, twice, then stopped near the deep end. She pressed her lips together, eyes glassy, jaw set. The enforcer in crimson had trained her well. Move, obey, don't feel. But training cracks under repetition. She bent to straighten a lane rope that didn't need straightening. Her knuckles whitened. She glanced toward the gate, then back at me, a question she couldn't ask, rising and falling in her chest. The clipboard queen's notices fluttered in the morning breeze, corners lifting like flags. I remembered the tug, the camera, the lie dressed as order. I remembered how systems depend on quiet helpers. Lydia wasn't quiet because she agreed. She was quiet because she was scared. A whistle chirped as another lifeguard arrived. Lydia startled, then steadied. She took a breath that looked like resolve trying on a coat. She didn't come over, not yet. But she didn't leave either. As I stood to go, our eyes met again. This time she held the look. A nod, almost imperceptible, passed between us. It wasn't a promise. It was permission. I walked out through the gate, the sun finally clearing the rooftops. Behind me, water lapped, constant and honest. Power hates daylight, and daylight had arrived with a witness who couldn't unsee what she'd seen. The HOA office smelled like burnt coffee and lemon cleaner, a manufactured authority pressed into beige walls. I arrived with my daughter's medical folder tucked under my arm, not to show it, just to feel its weight. Karen Bellamy sat behind the desk like a judge without a robe, red blazer immaculate, phone face down, waiting to be picked up like a weapon. "You're late," the board chair said, eyes flicking to the clock she'd positioned for intimidation. "I'm on time," I said, standing. "You moved the meeting." The enforcer in crimson smiled without warmth. "We adapt." She slid a packet across the desk. Violation notices. Fines. A suspension letter with my address spelled wrong. The clipboard queen had worked overnight. I didn't touch the papers. I'd learned that touch meant consent. "You filmed my child," I said. "We documented misconduct," the tyrant in heels replied. "Rules apply equally." The word equally landed like a lie. Karen Bellamy leaned back, steepling fingers, and began her escalation like a rehearsed play. Pool access revoked, parking reassigned, a hearing scheduled during my work hours. Each sentence tightened the vice, measured and calm. "This is harassment," I said. "This is governance," the board chair snapped. "And it's escalating because you refuse compliance." She tapped the packet twice. Signed the acknowledgement. I didn't. I watched the reflection in the framed community award behind her. The plaque listed volunteer hours and smiles, a trophy for control. The enforcer in crimson followed my gaze and smirked. "You think witnesses help you?" Karen Bellamy said. "They help us." The door opened then. Lydia Perez stepped in, tablet hugged to her chest. She stopped short when she saw me. Her eyes dropped to the floor, then lifted, torn. The clipboard queen didn't look back. "Perfect timing," the tyrant in heels said. "Read him the policy." Lydia's lips parted. She cleared her throat. Her voice shook on the first line, steadied on the second. She read words she didn't believe, eyes never leaving the screen. I saw her shoulders tense with each clause. When she reached the filming section, she hesitated. Karen Bellamy coughed. Lydia continued. I felt anger climb, hot and focused. "You can't film a minor," I said. "You know that." The board chair laughed softly. "Common areas have no expectation of privacy." "Except when targeting," I said, "except when medical devices are involved." The enforcer in crimson leaned forward. "Careful. Accusations carry penalties." I stood. "So do patterns." Silence stretched. Lydia's grip whitened. The tyrant in heels stood too, mirroring me, reclaiming height. "Final notice," Karen Bellamy said. "Cease disruption or face enforcement." She slid a new page on top, freshly printed. "Emergency assessment. Immediate effect." This is retaliation, I said. This is authority, the clipboard queen replied. I took the packet then, not to sign, but to leave. As I turned, Karen Bellamy added, almost kindly, "We'll be watching." At the door, I stopped. "Then watch closely." Outside, the hallway buzzed with fluorescent light. Lydia followed, footsteps quick. She didn't speak, just pressed a small card into my hand, eyes darting back toward the office. The card held a number and a single word: tonight. Behind us, the enforcer in crimson opened the door. "This isn't over," she called. I walked away, the packet heavy, the card light, escalation complete. By the time dawn scraped light across the parking lot, the board thought the storm had passed. They were wrong. The night had only tightened the knot, and Karen Bellamy woke hungry for control. She arrived early, heels clicking like a metronome. The clipboard queen rehearsing lines meant to sound reasonable while cutting deep. The agenda was clean. The motives were not. Inside the clubhouse, whispers slid along the walls. Emails had leaked. Receipts existed. The board chair felt it in her spine, a cold prickle that no blazer could hide. She smiled anyway, the tyrant in heels turning warmth into theater. Cameras were banned. Phones were silenced. Order, she said, would be restored. I took a seat in the back, quiet, listening. The enforcer in crimson began with procedure, drowning facts in policy. She cited bylaws like scripture, skipping the verses that didn't serve her. When a neighbor raised a hand, Karen Bellamy cut him off with a glance sharp enough to end sentences midair. The room obeyed. For now. Then the first document slid onto the screen, a vote time-stamped after midnight. Another dated before notice was posted. Murmurs grew teeth. The clipboard queen's smile thinned, but she pressed on, pushing a motion through with speed, trying to outrun doubt. She called for hands. She counted fast. She announced victory before the echoes settled. That's when the door opened. The sound wasn't loud, just final. The board chair stiffened. A county seal caught the light. Not a raid, not a spectacle, just presence. The tyrant in heels tried to laugh it off, but the laugh cracked. Procedure met authority, and authority didn't blink. Questions followed, calm and precise. Who authorized the emergency vote? Why were records altered? Why did funds move without approval? Karen Bellamy answered with confidence first, then irritation, then silence. Each pause stretched. Each answer contradicted the last. The enforcer in crimson reached for her clipboard like a shield, but paper doesn't stop truth. A neighbor spoke up. Another followed. Stories aligned. Dates matched. The room leaned forward as if gravity had shifted. The clipboard queen attempted a reset, calling for recess, but authority shook its head. Not today. The board chair realized the script had flipped, and she was no longer directing. I stood and placed a final packet on the table. Clean, indexed, boring in the way evidence should be. The tyrant in heels scanned the first page and went pale. She recognized the handwriting. She recognized the email header. She recognized the consequence. The vote was voided. Access was suspended. An interim chair was named. Karen Bellamy protested, threatened, promised appeals. The enforcer in crimson became small, then loud, then small again. None of it moved the needle. Control slipped, not with a crash, but with a click. As the meeting ended, sunlight poured through the windows, exposing dust and fingerprints. The clipboard queen gathered her things slowly, dignity leaking with every step. The board chair paused at the door, eyes searching for allies who had already turned away. Outside, neighbors exhaled, not relief, readiness. This wasn't the end. It was the hinge. The tyrant in heels had lost the room, but not the war, and everyone felt the quiet promise settling in. The next move would be hers, and it would be desperate. She would test lines, recruit loyalists, and flood inboxes with half-truths. The board chair would posture. The clipboard queen would scheme. The enforcer in crimson would posture again, and Karen Bellamy would smile for cameras she pretended to despise. I watched from the curb, patient. Leverage matures when rushed opponents mistake noise for momentum. The next meeting was already scheduled. So was the reckoning. Silence gathered interest, alliances shifted, and the tyrant in heels prepared a gamble that would expose everything she touched before the city finished counting and the clock refused mercy for anyone watching closely. The morning after the meeting, Karen Bellamy moved fast, because speed hides fear. She flooded inboxes before sunrise, the board chair spinning urgency into virtue. Subject lines promised clarity, bodies buried confusion. By the time neighbors woke, the narrative had a head start. She called allies next. Not friends, assets. The tyrant in heels framed the setback as sabotage, insisting rules were broken by outsiders, not her. Voices hummed approval. Doubt was labeled disloyalty. The clipboard queen rehearsed calm outrage, practiced sighs, practiced concern, practiced the art of sounding reasonable while sharpening the blade. At noon, a notice appeared. A special session, emergency again. The enforcer in crimson loved emergencies. They compressed time. They punished patience. She cited safety, compliance, decorum, words stacked like barricades. Attendance was limited. Comment was capped. Control was back on the menu. I read the notice twice and smiled once. Rushed meetings leave footprints. Karen Bellamy couldn't resist adding her signature flourish, a clause that contradicted the interim order by accident. The board chair didn't see it. Confidence narrows vision. The room filled anyway. Fewer chairs, more tension. The tyrant in heels arrived late, as if timing were a crown. She apologized sweetly. She thanked everyone. She pivoted to business. The clipboard queen presented slides heavy with charts, light on sources. Numbers behaved until they didn't. A question rose from the second row. The enforcer in crimson cut it down. Another followed. Karen Bellamy smiled and deferred, promising answers later. Later is where accountability goes to nap. The board chair called for a vote, hands already rehearsed. That's when the projector froze. Silence pooled. A cursor blinked. The slide changed without permission. Not hacked. Corrected. A document appeared, plain and fatal, bearing the clause she'd forgotten. The tyrant in heels stiffened. The clipboard queen whispered too late. Eyes tracked the screen like a verdict reading itself aloud. The board chair protested procedure. Authority answered gently. This session violated the interim order. Any vote would be invalid. Karen Bellamy objected, voice rising, composure fraying. The enforcer in crimson reached for policy again, but policy had turned on her. Neighbors leaned forward. Phones buzzed. Screens captured what bands couldn't stop. The tyrant in heels demanded removal of the document. Authority declined. Calm is infuriating when bluster fails. A resident stood and read from the screen. Dates, signatures, transfers. Each line landed like a measured knock. Karen Bellamy interrupted, accused, deflected. The clipboard queen tried to adjourn. The board chair called security. Security looked at authority and didn't move. Then came the question no one could dodge. Who benefited? The room knew the answer. Karen Bellamy knew it too. She spoke of service, of sacrifice, of personal attacks. The words slid off the evidence and puddled uselessly. The vote collapsed. The session dissolved. Access tightened further. A formal inquiry was announced, not as threat, but as process. The tyrant in heels laughed once, sharp and brittle, and promised this wasn't over. Outside, heat shimmered. Neighbors clustered, cautious but awake. The enforcer in crimson slipped away first. The clipboard queen followed, eyes down. The board chair lingered, searching for applause that never came. Karen Bellamy exited last, sunglasses on, smile reset. She waved like a candidate. Cameras clicked. I watched the angle of her chin, the calculation returning. Desperation breeds gambles, and gambles leave trails. The next move would be louder, messier, and meant to intimidate. She would threaten fines, suspend access, test patience. She would dare someone to blink. I didn't. Hooks were set, timelines aligned. When control addicts feel cornered, they reach. And when Karen Bellamy reached again, she would grab exactly what proved everything. The day began quietly, but the calm was an illusion, a thin veneer over the storm I already knew was coming. I met the conflicted witness, Laura Myers, on the edge of the cul-de-sac, her hands twisting a coffee cup as if it contained answers she didn't dare speak aloud. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting Karen Bellamy, or the board chair, as she sometimes called herself in whispers of intimidation, to materialize from the shadows. "They're watching," she muttered, voice low. Her eyes flicked to the neighbor's porch, to the driveway, as if the enforcer in crimson could appear at any second. Laura had always been loyal, or at least obedient, but the clipboard queen's tyranny had pushed her past the line. Today she was ready to tell what she'd seen, even if fear still throbbed in her chest. She swallowed hard, then began recounting Karen Bellamy's moves, the threats, the manipulations, the hidden coercions that had gone unnoticed by most neighbors. Every mention of the tyrant in heels made her wince. Her words were clipped, careful, each one a confession wrapped in layers of hesitation. She didn't think anyone could stop her, Laura said, her gaze dropping to the ground. Karen Bellamy, the board chair, she's not just enforcing rules. She's testing everyone's limits. The weight in her voice confirmed it. She'd seen the ugly side, the strangling control the clipboard queen wielded like a weapon. The enforcer in crimson would have considered it weakness. I knew, though, that this was strength delivered under duress. I nodded slowly, letting her feel safe in the silence between words. The neighborhood was quiet, the faint hum of morning traffic a distant rhythm. "What exactly did you see?" I asked, not pressing, but firm. Laura swallowed again, then spoke in rapid, jerky bursts, like she couldn't hold it in any longer. Karen Bellamy, she threatened the Harlows last month. Said she'd ruin them if they didn't comply. And the incident with your daughter, she didn't expect anyone to notice. The board chair, the enforcer in crimson, none of them realized. Someone was watching. Her gaze flicked to me, pleading, desperate for assurance that speaking out wouldn't be the end of her world. I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "You're not alone. Not anymore. What you tell me stays with us, and it will be used. Karen Bellamy can't win if we expose everything." The clipboard queen had always relied on secrecy and fear. Once those walls cracked, her control wavered. The tyrant in heels could not intimidate what she could not see. Laura hesitated, then nodded once, sharply, as if that single motion could expel months of internal struggle. "There's more. Records, hidden emails, timestamps." She tried covering her tracks, but mistakes, tiny ones. "They're all there. I can show you," she whispered. Her courage trembled, but it was present. The enforcer in crimson would have mocked hesitation. I welcomed it as honesty. As she spoke, the neighborhood seemed to lean in, listening to the quiet rebellion of one conflicted witness finally choosing sides. Karen Bellamy, the board chair, the tyrant in heels. They had underestimated this moment, this simple act of disclosure. And now, with Laura providing the critical insight, our strategy could advance. I felt the pieces sliding into place, each revelation a push toward accountability, each confession a nail in the clipboard queen's veneer of untouchability. By the time we parted, Laura had handed over digital evidence and detailed observations. She left with a cautious, wary relief, a small smile hinting at freedom from silence. Karen Bellamy might still maneuver, still plot, but the enforcer in crimson, the tyrant in heels, the clipboard queen, all facets of her carefully controlled persona, now faced cracks. We had the truth, and the truth was a weapon. Later, as I reviewed the information, I realized how pivotal this moment was. Part of the victory strategy hinged on professional expertise revealing wrongdoing, and Laura's courage had provided precisely that. Karen Bellamy's overreach, every minor misstep, every hidden threat, now lay exposed in a form that could not be ignored. I could anticipate her next move, calculate the timing, and position for impact. The tyrant in heels had not considered the power of a conflicted ally, and that oversight would become her undoing. I sat in my car outside the municipal records office, engine ticking as it cooled, Laura's evidence glowing on my phone like a live wire. The air smelled of hot asphalt and cut grass. Part 7 had ended with truth in my hands, and Part 8 began with preparation. Karen Bellamy didn't know it yet, but the board chair had stepped onto a narrow bridge with no rails. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed. I chose a corner desk, not hidden, just unremarkable. This place rewarded patience. I mapped timelines, cross-checked timestamps, and flagged contradictions. The enforcer in crimson had relied on speed and intimidation. I relied on sequence. Every action leaves a shadow. I followed them. Midway through my review, my phone buzzed. A message from a neighbor. She's calling an emergency meeting. No names needed. The clipboard queen loved urgency because urgency erases questions. I smiled without warmth and kept working. Preparation beats panic every time. I stepped outside to think. Wind rattled the flagpole. Across the street, a cafe window reflected my face, older than last week, steadier than yesterday. The tyrant in heels had trained us to react. Today, I planned to arrive early, silent, and precise. Back in the car, I built the sequence. First, establish pattern. Second, isolate leverage. Third, set the stage where witnesses couldn't look away. Karen Bellamy preferred closed rooms. I chose spaces with echoes. I saved files in redundant places, labeled plainly, nothing dramatic. Drama belongs on her side. At the Riverwalk later that afternoon, I walked the length of the board's favorite photo op. Sunlight flashed on water. Joggers passed. This was a public spine through the neighborhood. If the board chair tried to posture here, she'd be performing for strangers. I pictured it, measured sight lines, noted the sound of footsteps on planks. Sensory details matter when truth needs amplification. A red blazer appeared in my mind, then vanished. The enforcer in crimson would test me before the meeting, maybe with a warning, maybe with a smile. I rehearsed my answer and then let it go. Rehearsals end when the facts speak. Dusk brought a knock at my door. It wasn't her. It was another neighbor, voice shaking, asking what I knew. I didn't overshare. I invited them to stand with me tomorrow. Numbers change rooms. The clipboard queen hated that. Night fell. I spread papers across the kitchen table, not to discover, but to arrange. Discovery was done. Now came alignment. The tyrant in heels thrived on chaos. I created order. I slept lightly, dreaming of footsteps and water. Morning arrived sharp. Coffee bitter, sky clear. I dressed simply and left early. As I drove, my phone buzzed again. Agenda updated, the message read. Karen Bellamy was adjusting. Good. Adjustments mean pressure. I parked near the community hall, the new primary stage. People gathered, murmuring. I felt the low electricity of anticipation. This was preparation becoming presence. I checked my files one last time, breathed, and stepped out. The board chair would see me soon. The sequence was set, the echoes ready, and the tyrant in heels was walking into a room that would remember everything. I waited, listening to chairs scrape and voices rise, counting breaths to stay grounded. Karen Bellamy would enter composed, the board chair masking nerves with ceremony. The enforcer in crimson would scan for weakness. I offered none. My shoulders settled, jaw loose, hands steady. This wasn't defiance, it was readiness. When the clipboard queen finally crossed the threshold, the room's temperature shifted. I felt it. Preparation hums when it's right. The tyrant in heels thrived on surprise. I'd removed it. What remained was sequence, witnesses, and time doing its quiet work. I stood, present, and let the moment begin. It would unfold slowly, publicly, and inevitably, exactly as planned, with the board chair discovering control dissolves under light and witnesses refusing silence together. The doors closed behind us with a soft clap, and the room settled into a tense hush that felt heavier than noise. Part 8 had ended with me standing ready, and Part 9 began with Karen Bellamy taking the center seat like it belonged to her spine. The board chair straightened papers, eyes flicking up to measure the room. I stayed quiet. Silence was the first lever. Chairs scraped. A cough. Someone dropped keys. The enforcer in crimson cleared her throat and launched into procedure, crisp and rehearsed. She loved structure when it favored her. I tracked her words, noting where they skimmed past facts. Every omission mattered. I wrote nothing down. Memory was sharper without ink. She announced revisions to the agenda. The clipboard queen smiled without warmth and scanned for nods. A few came, others hesitated. I met those eyes and didn't flinch. Hesitation spreads when it's acknowledged. Karen Bellamy noticed. Her heel tapped once, then stopped. When public comment opened, she limited time. The tyrant in heels leaned forward, voice sweetened, urging efficiency. I rose slowly, not asking permission. Murmurs rippled. I felt the room tilt toward me, not in support yet, but in attention. Attention is oxygen. I stated dates, places, sequences, no accusations, just order. The board chair interrupted with a practiced laugh, trying to compress the timeline. I paused until the laugh died. Pauses embarrass interruptions. The enforcer in crimson stiffened. The room heard the difference. She demanded relevance. I offered relevance without emotion. Names rotated in my mouth, including hers, then back to neutral descriptors. The clipboard queen bristled at the loss of dominance. I watched shoulders tighten across the room. People lean forward when something finally makes sense. Emotion came fast, designed to close discussion. Karen Bellamy raised her hand first. Others followed, slower. I didn't argue the motion. I asked for verification of authority. One sentence. Calm. The tyrant in heels blinked. Authority hates being verified. She deferred, then redirected. The board chair's voice hardened. I thanked her and sat. Sitting is louder than shouting when it lands. A neighbor stood next, voice trembling but clear, echoing my sequence. Another followed. The enforcer in crimson glanced at the clock. Time was no longer hers. A recess was called. People stood, buzzing. I stepped into the hallway where light fell cleanly through high windows. Laura passed me without stopping, a folded page sliding into my palm. No words. The conflicted witness had chosen momentum. Back inside, the clipboard queen returned composed, announcing procedural corrections. Karen Bellamy avoided my eyes. The board chair's authority thinned as she spoke, each sentence shorter, less certain. I could hear it. Others could too. Questions followed, not from me, from the room. The tyrant in heels answered some, dodged others. Dodges pile up. I felt the collective shift from fear to curiosity. Curiosity is the beginning of accountability. When my turn came again, I stood and summarized the sequence once more, ending with a request for public verification. No threats, no flourish, just light. The enforcer in crimson objected on form. The objection sounded small. The vote was postponed. Gasps. A postponement is not victory, but it's exposure. Karen Bellamy gathered her papers too quickly. The board chair announced adjournment and left without ceremony. People lingered, talking openly now. As I stepped outside, evening cooled the air. The building exhaled behind me. Part 9 closed with momentum in the open, witnesses awake, and the tyrant in heels retreating under ordinary light. Tomorrow would bring resistance, but tonight proved something essential. When sequence meets witnesses, power starts to leak. I drove home steady, knowing the next move would be louder, public, and harder to control, especially for someone who needed control to breathe. Morning arrived sharp and public, and Part 10 opened where the night left off, with Karen Bellamy already moving pieces before anyone noticed. The board chair requested an emergency compliance review, framing it as routine. I watched the room accept the framing. Framing matters. It tells people where to stand before they know why they're standing there. Power hides in procedures when nobody asks who wrote them first. The enforcer in crimson set the location change, shifting us to a community auditorium to invite optics. Chairs multiplied, cameras appeared, and whispers thickened. The clipboard queen smiled at the turnout like it was proof of righteousness. I felt the opposite. Crowds don't favor bullies once patterns surface and witnesses start comparing notes, especially when timelines align and authority questions arrive early from everywhere today. Karen Bellamy entered late, a calculated delay, heels echoing like punctuation. The tyrant in heels took the aisle seat, scanning faces she once commanded. I stayed still. Letting someone search for control wastes their energy. The board chair opened with pleasantries, but her voice skimmed thin, rehearsed, and brittle. Every brittle sound carried farther under microphones and public attention than she expected this morning alone. Procedure rolled fast. The enforcer in crimson called sections, limits, and timekeeping, compressing stories into crumbs. I waited for compression to fail. It always does. When neighbors spoke, they overlapped without meaning to, and overlap stitched truth. The clipboard queen frowned, tapping her pen to regain tempo. Tempo favors the prepared, not the honest, until rooms change. Today the room changed loudly in seconds flat. I stood when recognition hit, not waiting for permission. Names, dates, sequence again, steady as metronome. Karen Bellamy interrupted, then stopped herself, sensing the audience. Silence grew teeth. The tyrant in heels shifted posture, defensive now. I asked one question about jurisdiction, and the room leaned forward. Jurisdiction turns noise into clarity faster than anger ever could. Cameras zoomed, breaths held collectively across rows nearby. The board chair attempted a reset, proposing closed session. Booing rose, soft, then firm. The enforcer in crimson looked trapped between rules and reality. I didn't celebrate. I waited. Pressure reveals fractures. Karen Bellamy whispered to counsel, then nodded, a nod that conceded nothing yet promised delay. Delay is admission when eyes are open and clocks are public. The crowd sensed that immediately, clearly today. A motion passed to continue in open forum. Applause cracked like ice. The clipboard queen recorded reluctantly, each mark a surrender. I spoke less, letting others carry weight. Witnesses don't need coaching when patterns are simple. The tyrant in heels avoided the microphones, but microphones followed. Avoidance looks worse on replay, especially when truth keeps talking. Tonight would prove that without my voice at all. Breaks came and went. Reporters lined edges. The enforcer in crimson fielded questions with clipped phrases. Karen Bellamy watched me once, then looked away. Power hates mirrors. The board chair announced next steps with shaking hands, scheduling oversight she couldn't cancel later. Oversight terrifies small empires built on routine and unchecked habit. I packed nothing, carrying momentum instead. Outside, dusk waited patiently for resolution soon. As adjournment hit, the room buzzed with plans. The tyrant in heels retreated through a side door. I stayed, answering simple questions, pointing to sequence, never names. Tonight wasn't about winning. It was about making retreat impossible. Karen Bellamy knew it. Her pace gave it away. When power rushes, it fears being counted in daylight. Part 10 closed on that truth. Tomorrow promised confrontation openly. I walked into night air steady, hearing distant applause fade. The board chair's voice echoed in my head, smaller now. The enforcer in crimson would regroup. The clipboard queen would log. The tyrant in heels would plot. Part 10 ended with exposure set, witnesses primed, and control slipping toward daylight. Nothing collapses faster than authority once ordinary people compare notes under shared lights together now. Public notice had drawn the crowd early tonight, and I felt the room tighten as cameras rose and murmurs sharpened into expectation around us. Karen Bellamy arrived last again, practiced, unhurried, eyes cold. The board chair wearing confidence like armor before impact. Tonight demanded truth, everyone sensed it, now, here. The enforcer in crimson opened proceedings with clipped formalities, but the crowd answered with restless movement, a low tide pushing forward, refusing to be contained by procedure anymore. I stood when recognition flickered. Gasps followed, then silence spread fast. Karen Bellamy froze briefly. The tyrant in heels blinked, hard, once. I spoke calmly, recounting sequence, dates, witnesses, nothing embellished, letting repetition reveal pattern as neighbors nodded and phones recorded every pause. The clipboard queen tried interrupting twice. Boos rose, unified, protective. Karen Bellamy shifted seats. Authority leaked visibly. Tonight belonged elsewhere. Truth had witnesses. Plenty watched closely, all around, us. The board chair called for order, voice cracking, proposing recess, but the audience refused, chanting for answers, accountability, names spoken clearly. I waited again. Waiting sharpens exposure. The enforcer in crimson consulted counsel. Karen Bellamy stared ahead. Her silence roared. Cameras loved it. History forming live. Right here now. Together. A neighbor described harm without theatrics. Voice steady, eyes wet, and the room inhaled as one, understanding stakes beyond rules. The tyrant in heels objected weakly. Groans answered her. Karen Bellamy raised a hand. Sound died instantly. Power tested, failing. I named oversight authorities. Jurisdiction snapped focus. Everything aligned. Finally. The board chair attempted closure, but motions flew, votes demanded, and public comment extended as democracy woke hungry. I watched Karen Bellamy calculate. Her playbook thinned. The enforcer in crimson yielded time. Applause broke restraint. Faces turned hopeful. Pressure became irreversible. Nothing left private. By collective will. Tonight proved it. Testimony continued, concise, cumulative, and the clipboard queen recorded reluctantly as the record thickened. Karen Bellamy objected once more. Denied by the crowd. The tyrant in heels exhaled sharply. Control evaporated. I stayed measured. Measured wins trust. Trust wins outcomes. Outcomes reshape futures. Tonight mattered deeply, to everyone present, here. When recess finally came, it felt ceremonial, not evasive, because momentum refused disappearance. Reporters surged closer, questions sharpened edges. The board chair faltered. Karen Bellamy slipped sideways. The enforcer in crimson blocked exits. Transparency demanded access, I answered briefly. Facts traveled faster. Silence couldn't catch up, not anymore, ever, again. Returning inside, the crowd settled with purpose, and the meeting resumed under a different authority. The clipboard queen announced oversight referrals. Murmurs turned satisfied. Karen Bellamy stiffened. The tyrant in heels whispered urgently. Council shook heads. I felt weight lift, not relief, resolve. Resolution takes follow-through. Tonight began that. The board chair closed public comment, promising timelines, safeguards, and compliance audits visible to all. Applause thundered. Karen Bellamy avoided eyes. The enforcer in crimson nodded stiffly. The clipboard queen packed slowly. The tyrant in heels exited alone. I stayed until end. Endings matter. Beginnings matter more. Tonight marked both. Outside, voices lingered, grateful, determined, and the night felt lighter without surrender. I breathed deeply. Karen Bellamy passed silently. The board chair didn't follow. Power rearranged itself. The enforcer in crimson paused. Eyes met briefly. Respect flickered. I nodded once. Community reclaimed ground. Justice moved forward. Part 11 closed. Strong. It wasn't victory yet, but it was irreversible motion, and everyone knew tomorrow would continue. The tyrant in heels vanished. Karen Bellamy's era cracked. The board chair faced daylight. The enforcer in crimson would answer. The clipboard queen would record truth. I walked home steady, listening to calm. Finally. Enough. Part 11 ended with accountability seated publicly, suspense intact, and the promise of consequences unfolding soon. Night held its breath. Tomorrow loomed honest. Karen Bellamy knew. The board chair knew. The enforcer in crimson knew. The clipboard queen knew. So did everyone else. Truth had teeth. It always does. Eventually. Dawn found me on the courthouse steps, stone cool beneath my palms, the city waking with cautious hope after the night we refused to forget. Karen Bellamy hadn't appeared yet, but her absence spoke louder than any speech. The board chair would soon face daylight scrutiny. The enforcer in crimson couldn't shield shadows anymore. The clipboard queen would file what was said. The tyrant in heels had lost the room. I reflected on how power changes when witnesses choose courage. I had arrived here as a father protecting his child, and I stood now as a neighbor accountable to many. The process mattered, not revenge, accountability. I breathed in traffic, pigeons, paper rustle. This was where consequences begin. Reporters gathered, respectful, focused. I answered with facts, dates, names, pauses. No theatrics. Karen Bellamy's counsel arrived late, whispering urgency. The board chair avoided the microphones. The enforcer in crimson stared at the marble. The clipboard queen carried folders thick with testimony. The tyrant in heels did not return. Oversight letters were filed by noon. Audits scheduled. Interim safeguards installed. The neighborhood learned procedures they were never meant to need. Parents held hands tighter. Neighbors exchanged numbers. I watched momentum stabilize, a wheel finally catching teeth. We had moved the lever together. In quiet moments, memory intruded. The sound of fear, the shock of disbelief. I didn't linger there. I honored it by building forward. Karen Bellamy's name appeared in notices without titles. The board chair appeared with conditions. The enforcer in crimson appeared constrained. The clipboard queen appeared methodical. The tyrant in heels appeared nowhere. By afternoon, a judge issued orders that clarified authority and limits, simple words with heavy weight. Compliance became mandatory, visible, enforced. The crowd outside exhaled, not celebration, assurance. This would hold. Walking home through our streets, I noticed small repairs begin. Signs corrected, notices reworded, meetings rescheduled openly. Children played again without flinching. I felt the ordinary return, precious and earned. That night, I sat at the table, hands steady, and wrote thank you notes. Witnesses, neighbors, strangers who spoke when silence was safer. I didn't name villains. I named values. Karen Bellamy would answer elsewhere. The board chair would adjust. The enforcer in crimson would follow law. The clipboard queen would keep record. The tyrant in heels would fade. Neighbors asked what came next, and I told them consistency mattered more than courage once the doors closed. Systems fail quietly, so vigilance must be boring, shared, scheduled. We formed committees, rotated chairs, posted minutes, and invited oversight back regularly. I trained volunteers on procedure, tone, and boundaries, because dignity disarms escalation. The board chair observed from a distance. The enforcer in crimson complied without commentary. The clipboard queen corrected language. Karen Bellamy remained absent, her authority dissolved by process. Trust rebuilt slowly, brick by brick. Every meeting opened on time, every vote recorded, every complaint answered. I kept my voice low and my pace steady. Anger burns fuel fast. Patience runs on gravity. When doubts surfaced, we returned to facts. When tempers flared, we paused. When rumors spread, we published. This wasn't glamorous, but it was durable. The neighborhood learned that protection doesn't require spectacle. It requires care. We chose care. And through it all, children slept easier, elders felt heard, and the rules finally served people, not pride, not fear, not the small hungers of power that once defined our nights and mornings too. Justice isn't loud forever. It settles, it teaches, it outlasts bluster. I looked at our front window, the light warm, the promise intact. We were safer because we stayed. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. I closed the door gently, knowing tomorrow would be ordinary again, and grateful that ordinary had been defended.